you. Thank you. You know, that is the most accurate introduction I've ever had about me. Because the less said, the better. Because I have got more degrees while I'm being introduced than I ever got when I was going and studying. I've had more things said about me that have happened that probably never did. But it sounds extremely good. It's like the guy who was introduced to speak at a conference, and they were told as an audience that this man made a $10 million profit in the stock market in New York. And he was going to talk about it. And so when a man stood up, he said, I want to make a few corrections. It really wasn't 10 million. It was 20 million. It really wasn't dollars. It was pounds. It wasn't in New York. It was in London. It wasn't me. It was my brother. And it wasn't made. It was lost. So better not to have a video and not disappoint than to have a video and then disappoint. Caleb, great to see you here. I wish I could read his letter to you. I was flying back from Thailand 3 or 4 days ago, and on my way to LA to do an open forum at UCLA when my staff had sent me this letter, and I started reading it about him wishing I would come to his place for Thanksgiving. And by the time he described the menu, I was salivating and longing to dig into those mashed potatoes, and made me want to look forward to Thanksgiving next year. Caleb, I hope I'll do it someday, but 2 days in the year my family will never let me go. That's Christmas and Thanksgiving. So maybe sometime in the year, if you hold a mock Thanksgiving dinner, we'll come and celebrate it together. But your mom did a great job writing that letter, and I'll treasure your letter. It's on my BlackBerry, so I'll use to read it to many, many people. Spoke to him on the phone this afternoon, and always a thrill to get letters from young kids. I want to give you a little humorous story. I hope I don't offend anybody with it. Then I'll give you a very sobering story and read the scriptures and get into it. Because when you're talking about no reserves and all the way down to no regrets, no retreats interspersing it, that's pretty tough commitment. That's pretty tough commitment. When you start analyzing that, you know, I moved to Canada when I was 20. Came from Delhi, India. And I remember driving past those Borden milk stores in Toronto many, many times. And there used to be a commercial, I think, nothing ordinary comes from Borden Dairy, something like that. And sounds like the extraordinariness went right into the family. But this is a story, lighthearted, please forgive me, I hope it doesn't bother you too much. But this little guy wanted to get a bicycle for his birthday. And he didn't know how to pray. So he started to watch Christian programming, and he watched a very high church program, and he got on his knees one night and he said, Almighty and eternal God, if it is in your perfect and eternal plan for me to have a bicycle, I will be most grateful to you if you will provide it in your time, in your will, but I would like it at 6:30 tomorrow morning. World without end, Amen. And he got up at 6:30, there was no bicycle. He was dismayed, he switched programming and he watched another one. And that night he went to bed and he said, Jesus, I declare my need for a bicycle and claim that it shall be blue and silver, and that will be outside my door at 6:30 in the morning. He woke up, there was no bicycle. He was really distraught. He walked around the house looking for some help, and he saw a statue of Mary on one of the mantles there. And he tucked it under his jacket and disappeared out of the house. Came back about 10 minutes later without that statue, and he walked into his room, and his mother was watching him. And he got on his knees and he said, Dear Jesus, if you want to see your mother again, my apologies. But you know, tell me this. If your prayer life was heard by somebody outside of God, your private prayer life, or your devotional life was watched, or how you actually live were watched by someone, what would they conclude about the nature and character of God? What would they learn about God by observing your life or mine? It's often quite terrifying to me because most of the people whom I hear from really don't know me. They know what I do, they know what I may write about or what I may say publicly, but my private life is my private life. There are aspects of my private life that my family would know, my children would know best. And that's why when somebody comes and says something very nice to me, I say, please don't ask my kids for a second opinion. Because you might hear something quite tangential to what it is that you may assume. So let me switch from just an imaginary story to an actual one. In the year 1945, a man by the name of Andrés Tamas, a Hungarian refugee, had spent 55 years in the Soviet prison, from 45 to the year 2000. He was 25 years old at that time. And now in the year 2000, after Glasnost and Perestroika and all that stuff, things were loosening up in the former Soviet Union. And they were going to be releasing the political prisoners, but Andrés Tamas just didn't look quite right. He spoke a language that sounded like gibberish. The people didn't understand him, and they were wanting to do away with him because he'd really been messed with in solitary confinement. His mind was all clouded. But somebody said to him, to the authorities that be, why don't you bring a Hungarian psychiatrist? Let them talk one-on-one. See what happens. So they hired a Hungarian psychiatrist. He came and spent some days with Andrés Tamas. And he came out and he said, this man's not insane. The man is quite normal, actually. You messed him up in solitary confinement for 55 years now. And what I suggest to you, he's actually speaking an ancient dialect of Hungarian. Release him to us, we will make him well. And I make a correction. He was actually 20 years old when he got into prison. Now he was 75. So they agreed to release him. Papers were signed. He was put into a wheelchair. He was being wheeled out. And if you haven't heard this story before, I think what will come to you is a bit of a shock. Because as he was being wheeled out, he made his first request. And you would never guess what it was he actually asked for. He turned to the doctor and he said, can I see a mirror? I haven't seen a mirror in 55 years. So they handed him this mirror, and he held it up in front of his face. He didn't withstand his own appearance for more than a fraction of a moment and turned that mirror down, covered his face with his hands and sobbed uncontrollably. Last time he saw his face, robust, strong, politically driven, looking for a better world, age 20. Now worn out, wizened, beaten down, taken to be insane, 75. More than half a century, no glimpse of what his countenance really looked like. How would you and I withstand something like this? You know, we wake up every morning and go through our ablutions and put on all the innocent forms of disfigurement and start looking like what we wished we did but don't actually do. And I shall keep from getting distracted here. But that we do routinely because it's part of our culture to at least tidy ourselves up and present ourselves in the best possible way. But what does a real mirror say to your real face and to me? Is there a mirror for the soul? Is there something that you and I can know of what the soul was intended to look like? And you know, the older you get, the more you think of such things in a very sober-minded way. And so I asked myself this question years ago. I'm on the road so much. I've been an itinerant for 4 decades, and you crisscross this globe. And rather reluctantly and not too proud of it, I say to you, I'll be on the road for over 200 days this year. So you get a lot of time to think, a lot of time on the plane, a lot of time alone in a hotel room. And one day I caught myself asking this question: is it possible to have a close walk with God and be totally fulfilled as a person? Now, the answer is not as obvious as you and I may sometimes think. If you were totally fulfilled and I were totally fulfilled, why do so many get off the main track? Why do they look for stolen waters? Why do they get into things that ultimately destroy them and rob them from what God had intended for them? What disfigurement then comes in? So here's the question. Is it possible to walk closely with God and really be totally fulfilled in your life? That's the kind of person who ultimately will write no reserves, no retreats, and no regrets. The man or the woman who knows his or her master and will lock stride with that Lord and know that the Lord will never take him or her into a path, but that he intends for the purification of the soul and to make a more sharp instrument out of that one. There was such a man in the Old Testament. His name is Daniel. And I would like to read for you a few verses and take you in a hurried way through some of these thoughts. But let me precede it with these words that may be familiar to you. Credited to anonymity. When God wants to drill a man and thrill a man and skill a man, when God wants to mold a man to play the noblest part, when he yearns with all his heart to create so great and bold a man that all the world might be amazed, watch his methods, watch his ways, how he ruthlessly perfects whom he royally elects, how he hammers and hurts him, and with mighty blows converts him into trial shapes of clay that only God understands, while his tortured heart is crying and he lifts beseeching hands. How he bends but never breaks when his good he undertakes. How he uses whom he chooses and with mighty acts induces him to try his splendor out. God knows what he's about. God knows what he's about. You know, we introduced young Caleb here tonight. If I'm not mistaken, the name means to be wholehearted. Wholeheartedly faithful. That's what the Hebrew name really means. Totally devoted. To be wholehearted. That's why a parent chooses a name like that. That's the kind of son they want. Here's a man who shows us what it means to be wholehearted. And what he did was make a decision to draw the lines that he would not cross. You see, our culture is flirting with all kinds of things. 2 nights ago at UCLA Auditorium, they'd asked me to speak on the theme of tolerance. Has it become intolerant? It was on Wednesday night. You know how many showed up for it? 3,000. Students, faculty, friends, all of that. People are struggling with the lines that are being blurred and erased. And you can be sure what G.K. Chesterton said is right. Whenever you remove any fence, always pause long enough to ask why it was put there in the first place. Whenever you remove any fence, always pause and ask long enough to ask why it was put there in the first place. I like this man because he draws the lines. And I see what it is he's really accomplishing. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of its God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Notice now, please. Young men, without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude of every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. They were to be trained for 3 years. And after that, they were to enter the king's service. Among these were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. The chief official gave them new names: to Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. And then you move to that last verse in that chapter. In every manner of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. You know, God was sending them as missionaries. The hosts were going to try and reprogram them. That was the story. Nebuchadnezzar was sharp. You know, when you think of Saddam Hussein, in his own entries and in his own speeches, he said he was going to try to rebuild the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar. He wanted to relive the life of this man. I wonder how much he really knew of how this man ended up. But he wanted the arrogance and the aggrandizement that this man had given himself. You can go today to East Berlin, and you will see what is the Pergamum Museum, and the outer corridor of Nebuchadnezzar's palace from the late 500s before Christ is right there. This man had a huge exalted view of himself, but he was brilliant. He knew what he was doing. He took the finest minds that had been brought, particularly these boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and sounds like the first Hebrew Lawyers Corporation or something like that. You know, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And what he was doing was training them in the language, the literature, and the philosophy of the Babylonians. You tell me he didn't know what he was doing? Andrew Fletcher, the great political activist from Scotland, said, "Let me write the songs of a nation. I don't care who writes its laws. Let me write the songs of a nation. I don't care who writes its laws." Literature and music and poetry oftentimes will shape a culture much more than anything else will. So he was indoctrinating them in the literature of the land. Philosophy, the form of argument. He was pouring this. You've got language, literature, philosophy. New men, new birth, according to Babylonian culture. So these 4 boys are about there, and they're being wined and dined and softened up, and they make their decisions. Daniel says to the steward, "Do me a favor. I don't want this dinner every night. Just give me a diet of vegetables and water and so on, an ordinary diet. That's all I want from you, please." He said, "I can't do that," the steward said, "because the king has ordered us. He wants us to toughen you guys up, build you into something, some real specimens." He said, "Look, after a certain number of days, if I look any less strong than any of the others, then you can change it. But right now, let me draw the line here, please." Now, why did he do that? Was he not fond of Babylonian food? No. But he knew the more he got accustomed to the comforts of the palace, the more he would get spoiled and find it harder to break away from what it is that they were trying to do for him and what it is he knew that God wanted for him. He drew the line of resistance by training his appetite. He drew the line of resistance by training his appetite. What it means so very clearly was he was actually disciplining his hungers. That's where it all begins. That's really where it all begins. What is shaping the appetite of this culture today? You know what William Blake said about the eyes? "This life's dim windows of the soul distorts the heavens from pole to pole and goads you to believe a lie when you see with and not through the eye." You are intended to see through the eye and with the conscience. This culture is changing you into believing that you see things with the eye, devoid of a conscience. This life's dim windows of the soul distorts the heavens from pole to pole. When the imagination is assaulted from the back door, disregarding the front door of reason, it gets you to process ideas more in where your imagination can run wild rather than where the reason can be the gatekeeper and protect you from irrationality. That's exactly what this culture is about. Yes, it may have been a great invention. The day you could sit in your living room and watch a screen. You can see some extraordinary things from the coronation of members of royal families, to spectacular games, to tremendous performances, and listen to grand voices and all of that. But it does not come as an instrument devoid of a built-in capacity for a corrupt mind to harness it for the wrong reasons. And what is it that goes on in the imagination of young people today? What is it that goes on? I seldom used to talk about it until I was very close to somebody whose life was totally destroyed, whose home was totally destroyed by pornography. I have to say to you, it's a subject that had never been an issue in my ranks of upbringing. Growing up in a culture like India, I don't think I'd ever seen one. I never knew such a thing existed. I'd never seen a magazine till this day. I never held one in my hand. That's not a vulnerable point in my life, so I can speak to it a little bit about how shocking it is when it does come into. Yeah, we all have our vulnerabilities. We all have our vulnerabilities. But I could imagine what happens to a young 12 or 13-year-old when this kind of poison is put into their system. And they get trapped into a mode of thinking, and built into their mind is a longing which no one human being can then satisfy. No one human being can then satisfy. Because what the purveyors of this stuff are doing is lodging within you actually an insatiable appetite so that you keep going back for more and more and more and more. They're planting within you a feeling that is unmeetable by any one human being. And when this individual's home was rocked by it, I remember her saying to me, I wish somebody would write a book on what this actually does to the victim in a home of a man whose soul has been so plundered. I have a friend who phoned me at 11 or 11:30 one night. I'm not up that late. My worldview ends by 9 p.m. It's gone. I'm up bright and early with the dawn, but after 9 p.m. my kids will keep going like this in front of me, and when they beg me to sit and watch a program, they say, give Dad a chair where he can lean back because in 5 minutes he'll be gone. Yeah, I do reach that soporific state quite quickly after 9 p.m. But 11 o'clock or so, and it was our personal phone, and I said, somebody who knows me, or a wrong number. And I picked it up, and it was this person who was quite close to me, and he said, Rav, I'm calling you, I'm having a problem. Serious trouble, I'm sorry to wake you up. I said, what's going on? This man is a surgeon in an emergency role. He does a lot of night work, and a lot of broken bones and broken bodies come in that he tries to mend. He said, I want to tell you, in all my years of medical practice, I've never seen a body so battered, so broken. Virtually every bone broken in the body. A woman who'd been battered by the man she was living with. He said, actually, she was gone. She was, for all purposes, gone. The paramedics just said, Doc, you better just leave her alone. She's gone. And he said, I didn't want to see her leave this world this way. I said, rush her, and we're going to make a try. He said, I knew my quickest bet was to get to a direct heart massage. I cut the rib cage, put my hand into that, and started to just go for a direct heart massage to see if I could get her back. And he worked away and worked away. He said it was like blubber. She was gone, irretrievable. He said, I walked away, he said, so shaken up by just observing this. And as I went over to the sink and was washing, I noticed I'd nicked my finger a little bit in the process. But I was just washing it away, and the nurse came and dumped a bunch of stuff on a table and said, Doc, you better take a look at this. It was all the paraphernalia. She was obviously a drug junkie, part of that lifestyle, with all kinds of used and dirty needles in there. And he's looking at that table full of that stuff, looking at that nick in the finger. And he said, what have I done? He says, I'm asking you to please pray for me. As a young dad, I think I may have contact some pretty deadly blood, and I won't have a real test result for a few days. And I could hear him crying. I prayed with him, and before he hung up, I said, is it a deep cut? He said, no, it's actually a paper-thin cut. I said, are you telling me a paper-thin cut will put your life, your whole life at risk for that kind of disease that you're talking about? He said, doesn't take anything more than that. Are there paper cuts to the soul? Are there those slender things that come rather non-dramatically? And you say to yourself, it is okay, I could withstand it. To you as young people, I want to challenge you. You're living in a very difficult world. Very difficult world. I don't know how many can withstand it. You all know the story of this college football player, all that's gone wrong with the cyber world and his imaginary friend or whatever it is, who knows what actually happened. You know, these things are happening in a world of make-believe. Or you're wanting to believe something that really isn't even there. I don't know what degree. This huge thing we call cyberspace has got a frontal attack capacity on your life and mine. And I just caution you as young people, be careful, beware how this thing makes inroads into your life, because it's payday someday. You can inherit the consequences of a small act a long time later. And if you're really talking about no reserves, if you're willing to give up the things that you would love to hold on to, be cautious about what you see and what you allow your mind to toy with, because it's very easy for it to start toying with you. It's true. And I don't know whether this world of people who produce some stuff, you know, it's so interesting. After Newtown happened, and I wrote a little blurb on that, because my staff, somebody just phoned me, said, Ravi, please say something about it. And I was traveling. I just got up quickly that morning and wrote that just one page. And I began to think to myself, you know, we talk about a weapon. And yes, we must discuss these things. These are sober-minded decisions we have to make. But it takes more than a weapon and a person who pulls the trigger. It takes the ammunition. And we think the ammunition only comprises of that bullet in the chamber. There's a lot of ammunition that has already gone in here. What ammunition is built into a mind that has got hate, anger, revenge? That is the instrumental cause of taking the weapon and using the ammunition for destructive purposes. We don't like to talk about these things. The surest thing about you and me, the most certain thing about both of us, is that we both got a depraved heart. We've both got a depraved heart. And the only answer that God has given for us, which is truly corrective, is redemption. The corrective. So draw the line in the places that you know will train your appetite. That'll be one of the greatest decisions you have ever made. He drew the line of resistance by training his appetite. Number two, what he did beyond this was he drew his line of dependence by going beyond merely learning and going to wisdom. Going beyond learning and going to wisdom. Now, I'm a lover of books. My poor wife, I think sometimes I wonder if she knew what she was doing when she agreed to marry me. I really wonder about it, you know. Poor thing. Because this week we've just sold our house, sold it a few weeks ago, and this week closed on a condominium. We're downsizing. I'm still young, but we're downsizing, you know. And the biggest worry I've had in this whole move, and today she was talking to me about it, where are we going to put your books? There's 7,000 of them. You know, where are we? And I'm having nightmares. Where are we going to put our books? How am I going to? Now I know where they are. I can just tell her, go to the fourth shelf, fourth bookcase, third shelf from below, 10th book from the right. You know, I've lived in this house for 20 years. Where are we going to put our books? When I studied at Cambridge, there's a great bookstore called Heffer's. It was right next to the lecture room where I took classes on King's Parade. And thousands of volumes. I'm not kidding you, and it's probably not the best thing to tell you from a platform, but every time I walked into that bookstore, I got so excited I had to go to the restroom first and then come and take the time because of books, books, books. The Hebrew motif was each man under his fig tree. I think for me it would be each man in his own library with a donut next to him or a piece of pizza or something, enjoying eternity. Books. The Apostle Paul talks about it. Bring me my cloak and my books. And then he says, but don't forget the parchments, the most important of them all. That's it. You can live with your books, but don't forget the parchments. Because it's the wisdom and the Word of God that is ultimately going to direct your paths, and His Word is going to be a light unto your feet and a lamp unto your path. You want to walk through life with wisdom, I suggest you do two things. Stay with the Word, and number two, get to know somebody who has endured a lot and whose faith has remained unshaken. Somebody who has endured a lot and whose faith and integrity are still intact. You know, we think we are so brilliant today, and once upon a time, we used to wonder whether there was any difference between an animal and a human being. Remember the old joke about the little boy going to his mother and saying, you know, Daddy says we came from apes, but you tell us, you know, that we're really created in the image of God. What do I believe? And she said, son, Dad can only tell you about his side of the family. I can tell you about my side of the family. No. So once upon a time, we were talking about whether there's any difference. Can you imagine that? Whether there's any difference between a human being and an animal. Now it's, at least we are sparing the animal the indignity of this comparison. Now we've come to the fact that we're no longer as good as computers. No, computers. When Garry Kasparov was playing, years ago he was playing, they created a Deep Blue computer for him, IBM did, and he was going to play against Deep Blue. And he went into hiding in some part of the world, and when they asked him why he was so nervous about it, he said, because I'm afraid if I lose, we would lose human dignity. I lost my dignity when they came out with the calculators. He's talking about the computers, you know. The calculators can calculate better than us. He's talking about losing dignity after computers. So before he played Deep Blue, he decided to just struggle through it, prepare. And Dr. Gary Galertner, who was that time professor of computer science in, I think, somewhere at Yale or something, he wrote this article in Time magazine. He said the idea that Deep Blue has a mind is absurd. How can an object that wants nothing, fears nothing, enjoys nothing, needs nothing, and cares about nothing have a mind? Oh yes, it can win at chess, but not because it wants to. It isn't happy when it wins or sad when it loses. What are its after-the-match plans if it beats Kasparov? Is it hoping to take Deep Pink out for a night in the town? No, it doesn't care about chess or anything else. It plays the game for the same reason a calculator adds or a toaster toasts. Because it is a machine designed for that purpose. No matter what feats they perform, inside they will ultimately, as persons, be a zero. No computer can achieve artificial thought without achieving artificial emotion. In the long run, I doubt if there is any kind of human behaviors computers cannot fake, any kind of performance they can't put on. It is conceivable that one day computers will be better than humans at nearly everything. I can imagine that a computer might someday have, a person might someday have a computer for a best friend. But that'll be sad. It'd be like having a dog for your best friend, only sadder. He said the gap between the human and the surrogate is permanent, will never be closed. Machines will continue to make life easier, healthier, richer, and more puzzling. Now listen to this line. He couldn't resist it. And human beings will continue to care, ultimately about the same things they always have, about one another, and many of them about God. Do you know, unwittingly, he picked the two greatest commandments: to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul and all your strength and all your mind, and to your neighbor as yourself. On these two hang all of the laws of the prophets. What else distinguishes us? What else distinguishes us? You know, we talk so much about sexuality, which is a symptom or an expression. We'll never be able to answer about what's right about sex until we answer the question, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be human? We must answer that first. And ladies and gentlemen, we are living in a world so bereft of wisdom. We desperately long and need young men, young women with the wisdom of God around them. I think one of the most thrilling things I see in an occasion like that is watch young people stand up and arms raised and singing, celebrating. I lost some of the best years in my life early. I came to life in Christ at 17, but it was on a bed of suicide. And the previous years, the locusts had eaten and plundered. Now, as I see how God rebuilds, reshapes, remakes, it's marvelous to behold. But I'd say to you, our world of politicians is starved of wisdom. They are absolutely bereft of wisdom. They actually think our problems are fiscal. What caused the fiscal crisis in the first place? Living irrationally, violating the principles of the soul. You cannot borrow with no possibility of return. And that which brought the nation to crisis individually, we've now elevated it governmentally. We're doing the same thing at a higher level that we did at the lower level. And you talk to people in Europe, they'll look at America and say, what on earth is America doing to itself? Do they not see what we've done to ourselves here? The moral fiber, desperately in need of wisdom. And by the way, may I say it's in a time like this that we as believers ought to come around those in need, those struggling, those who are caught in this vortex. And the charitable organizations need to come to their aid, give them back their dignity, give them back their possibilities, live by sacrificing in our own way so that those who don't have. That's why many of these agencies came into being in the first place, to lift the brother who's stumbling and fallen down, to lift the brother who made the mistake or faltered somewhere. They are not irredeemable, they are correctable, but let's not keep on making the mistakes repetitively. Wisdom. Wisdom in marriage. Wisdom in raising children. Wisdom in how we organize our time. Wisdom in the disciplines to keep the body in the best shape we can keep it in. All these things need wisdom. I remember one of the presidents of Africa, after I had the privilege some years ago of speaking to them at the African President's Summit of Prayer. One of the presidents, whom I shall leave unnamed, put his arm in mine, and it was quite a day, because they'd heard speeches on AIDS ravaging, on starvation, on hunger, and by the time they'd finished the statistics, you said, my word. It was my privilege to deliver a talk to them that day at the prayer breakfast. And one of these men, if I named him, you'd be stunned who it was, came beside me and walked me the corridor, put his arm in mine, and he said, Mr. Zacharias, our cumulative wisdom is unable to meet the daunting challenges of our time. Our cumulative wisdom is unable to meet the daunting challenges of our time. Some of you may be going through a home and a struggle with one of your kids. What you need more than anything else, I pray that God will give you wisdom. It's not just the answers, it's wisdom. Some of you may be struggling with what the future holds for you. I pray God will give you wisdom. In your relationship, whatever you're struggling with, wisdom. To know what to do, how to do it, and when to do it. Nebuchadnezzar comes and says to them, tell me what this dream means. They said, you tell us what the dream is. He said, you boys tell me what I dreamed about. This is not a good king, Tough boy. But he knew he had a lot of rogues who pretended to know a lot. Said, you tell me my dream and then tell me what the dream meant. And the boy said, no, you have to tell us, all the magicians and the enchanters. He said, you have to first tell us your dream. So no, you're magicians, why don't you tell me what the dream is? It's like the man who ran a lot of clairvoyants, a lot of palmists, a lot of astrologers in his company, and he gathered them all together and said, I know this is not going to come as a shock to you, but we're going to have to lay a lot of you off. If you really know what's coming, then you know what's coming. I don't even need to tell you, So he says, no, you tell me a dream. Tell me this. They didn't. He was going to slaughter the boys. Daniel says, Lord, don't let this happen. Tell me what that man dreamed about and give me the interpretation. And then the king calls him and he says, King, I want to tell you something. I didn't know this dream. Nothing in my learning has told me what your dream was. But the God who is in the heavens has revealed your dream to me. See, it's not your philosophy, language, or literature, King. It's not my philosophy, language, or literature. I'm going to tell you who revealed the dream to me. And now the dream. Yeah, there was a statue, head of gold, chest of silver, girth of bronze, legs of iron, feet of iron and clay. All sounds good. You're the head of gold. Wow, now tell me more, tell me more. Yeah, I'm afraid I'm going to have to tell you more. A stone cut out of no man's hand is going to come and smash this statue down, and it's going to be broken in 1,000 pieces from head to toe. The king said, I better get this boy on my side. He knows the dream. Wisdom. Wisdom. My time's running out. Let me tell you this quickly, and then I promise I'll keep my last point brief. I remember being in Ramallah, in Jerusalem. The Archbishop of Canterbury had taken a group of 5 of us to meet with the leaders from both sides, political and religious leaders. And on the last day we were meeting with Sheikh Talal, who's one of the 4 founders of Hamas, the militant group. Solidly built guy, had already spent 18 years in prison. Some of his kids had blown themselves up, suicide bombing, and we were to meet with Sheikh Talal. He hosted us for a lunch, big lunch. The room was full of smoke as they puffed away at their cigarettes and all that stuff. The whole room, I find it very difficult to handle that with my vocal ulcers, but I had to sit through that for several hours. And as we finished that whole thing, the Archbishop interacted with him, and he says to us 5 guys, why don't you ask a question each of the Sheikh? And the whole group, his entourage surrounding and his family. I won't tell you the question that I asked, but I didn't like the answer that he gave. And so I just said, Sheikh, you and I may never see each other again, but I don't like your answer. I said, let me just say this to you, sir. Not far from where you and I are sitting is a mountain. I said, 5,000 years ago, a man by the name of Abraham took his son up that mountain. Remember that story? He said, yes, I remember it. I said, let's not discuss which son. But he took his son up that mountain. I said, you know he took his son. And as the axe is about to come down, God holds his arm and stops it. He says, that's right. I said, what did God say? He looked at me blank. I said, God said, stop. I myself will provide. He said, that's right. I said, very close to where you and I are sitting 2,000 years ago, there's a hill. It's called Calvary. God kept that promise and took his son up that mountain. I said, Sheikh, this time the arm did not stop. He just stared at me. I said, Sheikh Talal, until you and I receive the son that God has provided for us, we'll be offering our own sons and daughters on the battlefields of this world for land and position and prestige and power. I shocked myself. I said, what on earth have I just said? And the Archbishop looked around. He said, I guess it's time to go home now. We'll go home. So we started to walk away, and as we were about to go down the steps, he put his arm around me and he said, Ravi, that was of God. I said, you really think so? I said, I sure hope so. I said, I sure hope so. So we started to walk down, and since the Archbishop was the guest of honor, we were just part of the hoi polloi. We are moving towards our cars, and Sheikh is moving towards the Archbishop, but he hurriedly put the Archbishop in and came to running towards me. I said, here it goes. I'm going to be in Ramallah now the rest of my life. He grabbed me by the shoulders, and he looked at me. Strong guy. He could have had me for lunch. He just holds me, pats me on both sides of the face, kisses me on both sides of the face. He said, Mr. Zacharias, you're a good man. I hope I see you again someday. And just wipes his tears and he walks away. What comes of these seeds planted, only heavens will reveal. But I tell you what, I learned a very tough lesson that day. Wisdom is something we desperately need in the most crisis-ridden moments. He drew the line of resistance, drew the line of dependence, and lastly drew the line of confidence. What's the confidence? God's going to rescue us. If He doesn't rescue us, we're still not going to compromise. Young people, that's what it's going to take. He'll rescue us. If He still doesn't rescue us, we won't compromise. And so let me just close with an illustration of the words of a hymn. Last year I had the privilege of being at one of the great prisons of America. It's called the Angola prison in Louisiana. It was the bloodiest prison in the country. 5,300 prisoners. 85% of them are life without parole. Life without parole. 45 of them on death row. When you were checked into that prison a few years ago, you were given your bed sheet and your pillow, and you were given a dagger, a knife to protect yourself. Because the walls, the carpets were all smeared with blood. It was a tough guy's prison. Then comes this new warden, quite amply built. And he said, I'll take over this place if you allow me to do it my way. What does he do? Bible verses all over the place. Chapel, Bible studies, bachelor's courses in theology by New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary. He's changed the whole place. Gangs are being disbanded and becoming gangs of pastors. Profanity is not allowed in that prison, neither by staff nor by the prisoners. You can take the almost fine-looking young woman to walk past those cells. There'll be no catcalls, there'll be no nasty words, nothing. I walked past from cell to cell, shook hands with some of those boys on death row and prayed with them. And spoke to a packed audience, and the message was piped into every cell. The hardest part was to go to the death chamber, where you see the bed where they strap him in. And on the outside is a table with 4 chairs where they have their last meal. And on the other side, a little separation from where members of the law and somebody representing the family, if they want to see that is done properly, are there. On the wall, a phone where the governor can still stay the sentence for a period of time. You sit down in that chair at the table and you say to yourself, you know, I'm come here as a visitor, I'm walking out. What does it mean for a man who's sitting down for his last meal? When you sit down, you look at the wall. Do you know what you see? You see a painting. Painted by a prisoner. Do you know what the painting is? Daniel in the lion's den. Basically saying, God can still rescue you. And you know what comes into your mind? What if He doesn't? You look to the right, the same prisoner painted another painting. Elijah going up on chariots of fire. Amazing. Amazing. That a prisoner found out one way or the other, God would be his rescue. If He chooses to take you one way, well, if not, He's got another plan for you to live with Him in glory. Ladies and gentlemen, draw the lines in the right places. The line of resistance, the line of dependence, and the line of confidence. Then you can also write, really, that there are no reserves, no retreats, regrets. Charles Wesley wrote, O thou who camest from above, the pure celestial fire to impart, kindle a flame of sacred love on the mean altar of my heart. There let it for thy glory burn with inextinguishable blaze, and trembling to its source return in humble prayer and fervent praise. Jesus, confirm my heart's desire to work and speak and think for thee. Still let me guard the holy fire. Still stir up thy gifts in me. Ready for all thy perfect will, my acts of faith and love repeat, till death thy endless mercy seal, and make my sacrifice complete. I never thought of doing this really, but I'm going to ask you to stand. And I'm going to say this: if God's spoken to you tonight, young or middle-aged or old, whoever you are, I'm going to ask Dave to just play for us something here. And don't look around. I truly say to you, I felt a prompting in my heart, do this. Do this. And if God has spoken to you tonight, just slip out from where you are and just come and bow your head here, and you're saying by that bowed head and that countenance, I'm saying to the Lord, no reserves, no retreats. I want my life in His hands. Send me anywhere. Only go with me. Will you come right now? Just come to the front. Stand here, bow your head in prayer. I'd like to say a word of prayer for you as I commission you. Do come. You may have not planned to do this. It may be that you don't even know the Lord really. You're struggling with that. And you say, I need to get this right with God. I'm going to make the front of the church an altar. And I'm going to come. Please do that. Ask Him to give you strength and come. Keep coming. Just wait 1 minute more and that's all. And I say it again, if you really don't know Christ, why don't you do that tonight? Just slip out. Come and say, I need to get this right before God. I don't know Him as my Savior. Come on up to the front. Heavenly Father, You are the God who calls. You are the God who prepares. You are the God who knows every moment before it even comes into our lives. As there are these precious ones bowed before You tonight, at the beginning of a great conference with a great vision, make this weekend a one that'll be ineradicably etched into every heart. Deliver Your promise in a way that only You can. Deal with us as only You can. Please, Father, we ask for gentleness and mercy. We don't deserve it, but we need it. I pray tonight if there's somebody here who doesn't know You, they will find You. For you have said, you shall search for me and find me with all my heart, with all your heart. Bless the gathering, walk in the midst of the people, and may your Holy Spirit just weave his presence through us.